Good morning, everybody. Happy Wednesday to you. It's a beautiful day, and it's a good day to be in the Word together, right? My name is Tim Harris. It's 10 o'clock, and we call this 10 with Tim. Every day, Monday through Friday, we take a few minutes, about 10 minutes, give or take a minute, and we go verse by verse through the Word of God. We are finishing the book of First Chronicles today, which is an accomplishment, but it doesn't mean a whole lot because we're going to roll right into Second Chronicles starting tomorrow. They really are just one book, and as you notice here, this a story ends with the death and burial of David, but obviously we are already moving forward into the story of Solomon. So let's look at the last chapter here of First Chronicles and the last bit of David's life here. It's a pretty amazing chapter because David's last act as king, his last act as a human being on the planet. I mean, his last thing he does before he dies is give himself first, and then all of his wealth, and then he encourages others to. And it's chapter 29 of First Chronicles is just this beautiful picture of people giving. And it's just glorious. Verses 1 through 9, David gives his own treasures for the sake of the temple, and I love it. He's already, as we've said, man, he started the building fund a while back, and he's been accumulating wealth from all kinds of different sources. But here, David digs into his own pockets. David goes into his own treasury as king and gives. Remember, this is the man who said, I'm not going to give anything to the Lord my God that costs me nothing. And so David does give to God, and he gives generously. And I mean, yeah, I know some of you are thinking, well, he's rich, he's the king, he's got all this, but he still sleeps in a palace, and you're right. But I just point out that David had served God with his whole heart before he was rich. I think the interesting thing here is in verse 5, where David, after he gives, he calls the other leaders to give. And again, it's a pretty good picture of leaders going first. Lots of times, in giving, campaigns in churches, I see, leaders, giving this charge for people to give sacrificially, but it looks like the pastor never sacrifices anything, and he continues to live pretty high and well, while other people give, and suffer and give joyfully and sacrificially. But here David goes first, and then the leaders after him go next. But David's charge for them to give is really interesting. It's in verse 5. The New Living Translation is pretty horrible. It just says, now then, who will follow my example and give offerings to the Lord today? Well, yeah, but that's not what he says. I mean, it is what he says, but truly what he says is more, who is willing to consecrate themselves to the Lord today? That's a better translation, who is willing to consecrate themselves. The whole idea is you give yourself first. And in this passage, all of these offerings are given by people who have given themselves first. Who is willing to consecrate themselves before the Lord today? Now, the other thing here is that David rather specifically uses the language of ordination. This phrase, consecrate yourselves, literally in the Hebrew is who is willing, and in this chapter, the whole theme of willingly giving, that there's no compulsion, there's no obligation to give here. These are all free will offerings. Nobody is being, having their arm twisted to give. These people are doing this willingly. And so that's an important part of it. But even in the ordination service, the Hebrew phrase was to willingly fill the hand to the Lord. It's really interesting, to fill the hand to the Lord. And yeah, it's a phrase used in ordination of priest, and I don't know exactly what it means. If anybody wants homework today, look that up for us. My hunch is it's a mutual thing. First off, I believe it probably has to do with the priest filling their hands with food from the table of the Lord. The priests are able to eat what nobody else is able to eat, free to eat. It's one of the few privileges and benefits of being a priest back in the Old Testament days. They have this ability to eat what is holy. And so I think that first part of that is probably related to that. They're able to fill their hand with good things from the Lord. And that's a really good picture of ministry, to be honest. It's not so much grasping and, feeding, gorging yourself. It's more the recognition that God is sharing with the priest precious things, sweet things, that only they are able to experience. In my own ministry, I feel this sometimes, and it's not wealth and money. It's not that sort of thing at all. There are just treasures of ministry that I love. I love baptizing people. I love when they go down in the water and they come back up, and that water rushing off of their faces. I just love that sight of that freshly washed face of a person being baptized. I think that's just glorious. To hear the prayer of salvation, as people pray, to be with saints when they die. I'm often the one called, and I'm often the one standing there right beside them as they step into glory. I'm just saying, if that's a phrase in Word Nation, to fill your hands, and the idea is that God is allowing you to participate at His own table in a privileged way, I recognize that in ministry. But also this idea of filling the hand, I think it has to do with receiving, to have your hand filled with the blessings from God Himself. So it's kind of two things, to fill your hand to give and to fill your hand to receive from God. But as I say, this is the phrase used in verse 5, and it literally has to do with ordination. But what David is inviting the people to do is to give to the Lord, to give themselves first, and then the offerings that come later are given joyfully and willingly from the hearts of people who have given themselves first. So anyway, I love that, and of course the offering is glorious, and the people rejoice over the offerings, and they continue from there. David offers a prayer of praise in those verses 10 to 22. I guess this chapter just reminds you of all the things you love about David as a leader. He goes first when it comes to giving and sacrificing. He doesn't ask others to do what he himself is not willing to do. And then he leads the way in praise. He leads the way in giving and sacrifice, and then he leads the way in worship and praise. And I love that. I love how he confesses at the beginning of his prayer simply that the kingdom belongs to God. You and I can say that, and that's it's obviously a figure of speech when I say it, because I'm not a king. But when David says the kingdom is yours, that is profound. That is David recognizing that, he comes and he goes, but the kingdom of God remains. It's not his, and I love that. I love that humility in verses 13, 14, and 15. Who am I? David's always had that very keen memory of who he is and where he was when God found him. Who am I? Who are my people? Everything we have has come from you. We only give what you first gave us. Man, that's got to be, what we should say at every single, offering time. Everything we have, you gave us, and we can't give you anything that you didn't give us. Isn't that amazing? That's just absolutely amazing. And it's just true. You can't give anything to God. You can just give it back because He has obviously given you everything, including the breath in your very lungs. And so I just love that. We are here only for a moment, visitors and strangers in the land as our ancestors were before us. Visitors and strangers. That's interesting. It's just a reminder that the world's not your home. You're just not here long enough to make it home. Sometimes it seems long. I'm 59. In some ways, it seems like a long time. In other ways, it seems like no time at all. And this is what David recognizes at the end of his life. Man, I wasn't here long enough to put down roots. I wasn't here long enough, to buy a whole gallon of milk. It's going to sour so quickly. I wasn't here long enough. I'm just a visitor, Isn't that interesting and profound? I'm just a visitor here. I'm not long enough to make it my home. I've done all this with good motives. I've watched your people offer their gifts willingly and joyously. And then he finishes out his prayer. You'll notice what comes next is that Solomon is officially anointed king. We'd already pointed out that obviously David and Solomon were functioning as co-regents. Solomon was king alongside his father David, kind of the king in waiting, or the apprentice king. But here Solomon is installed along with Zadok, his priest. It's interesting how the priest and the king sort of seem to rule together. And then the chapter ends with a summary of David's reign. David, son of Jesse, reigned over all Israel. He reigned first, of course, in Israel, 7 in Hebron, and then 33 in Jerusalem. Died at a ripe old age, and that's the end of David's life. Most of First Chronicles deals with David, but David's story comes to an end, and now everything goes toward the story of Solomon. And that's where we'll pick up in Second Chronicles. Second Chronicles chapter 1, 17 verses for tomorrow, okay? Second Chronicles chapter 1, verses 1 to 17. It's Wednesday. Gosh, if you're close by, come to church tonight. Come to Woodburn, our prayer meeting, Bible studies tonight. I'm going through the book of Romans. Romans chapter 5 tonight. I love Romans 5. Can't wait to read that with the folks tonight. So join us. If not tonight, I will see you in the morning, Lord willing, 10 o'clock for 10 with Tim.